It's 8:34 and this is Friday Night with Jon Harvey, and that music can only mean one thing. It's time for Man Friday, and I'm joined by the wonderful man whisperer himself, Kenny Mammarella-D'Cruz. How are you doing, Kenny?
Pretty excellent. So good to see you again.
Oh, that's what I want to hear. And not just your wonderful voice and your positivity. That's beautiful. Now, we've got a few very contrasting stories we're going to talk about in this section. And first, just want to pick up off the back of the news on this story that the National Screening Committee has advised against prostate cancer screening for most men after finding that harms would outweigh benefits. They did, however, recommend that men with a BRCA1 or BRCA2 faulty gene variant, which greatly increases their chances of developing aggressive prostate cancer, should be screened every 2 years. Now, this news has come as something of a blow to campaigners, and Prostate Cancer UK has expressed, quote, deep disappointment in the decision. I should say prostate cancer is the UK's second most common cancer, killing 12,000 men a year. Kenny, what's your take on this decision and the story around it?
Despair.
Right.
It just feels dangerous. This is serious. This is playing with people's lives. I don't know or understand the figures, to be frank, but I know enough people who have lost their lives, who've lost people. And I wonder about the old-fashioned digital rectal, because those examinations, and I know that sometimes I've had to literally fight to have it, which is very embarrassing, and it's not something that I want to have, but we need to be safe.
Yes.
I mean, look at the death rates. This is so important. This is vital. I don't get it. It's scary.
Well, I want to ask you, I think just you saying that is, I think, a really powerful thing for listeners to hear, if any men are listening to this, because I wonder if there is a taboo, like you mentioned the digital rectal screening. There is still, I think that some people are finding it hard to talk about this, let alone do it. I mean, let's take David Cameron, who has come out publicly to say he has had prostate cancer and he only got tested at the urging of his wife, Samantha. Part of this segment of the show is about how men deal with the most important issues of their lives, and life or death. It gets no more important. So how common is this problem, do you think?
It's hugely common, and people are shy to talk about it. People are scared to talk about it. People make jokes about it. It's vitally important. I've been in trouble talking about it and talking about the experience, because it's like, don't go there, don't talk about what it was like. Meanwhile, it's not intrusive. It's not like making eye contact and something uncomfortable or nasty. It's something that's so important, takes a few seconds. Irrespective of how you're going to have it tested, get things tested. Need to know what, even if there's nothing up, regular tests to see if there are any changes, just any changes. Keep an eye on these. I'm 61 now. I think from 50s, maybe I've heard late 40s, people take it seriously and have it tested.
Oh, well, I'm 45, and friends, including me, have had this is the PSA test we're talking about, isn't it? And I've had it. In fact, mine was very elevated at the start of the year, so I had suspected prostate cancer, which turned out to not be the case.
How did that feel to have?
It was terrifying.
Yeah, exactly.
But I did at least feel like my doctors were checking it out for me. This is all on the NHS, I should add. Yeah. So if I'm right, at a certain age, men can demand it. It might not be screening tests, but you can take this into your own hands.
Exactly. And I've heard people say, don't trust PSA. And it's like, well, however you choose something, do something. Don't just sit on it and pretend it's going to go away, pardon the pun.
Yes, it's complicated, because I think some medical experts would say there are false positives, and the PSA test isn't this sort of like absolute red flag on it. So it is very difficult, but it's good to hear your take on that. Now I'm going to lighten the mood with the rest of our segment, because fortunately there are some lighter male style stories in the ether, and one of them comes from America. Online MAGA influencers, Kenny, have this week they've been finding a new target for their ire, which I can't believe this, a pink J. Crew jumper, which they say can only be donned by beta males. And a Republican congressman, Tim Burchett, described it as something a sorority girl would wear. And conservative influencer David Freeman accused J. Crew of trying to feminise men. Now, this jumper is a baby pink knit with a Fair Isle pattern around the neck. I'm reading that out, listeners. I have no idea what that means. It costs 145 quid. What's going on? And why can't men wear a pink jumper?
I do.
Okay, great.
And I look great in pink. My wife loves me in pink. I'm not sure I would wear that jumper. And what incredible publicity that company and that jumper are getting.
So they've shot themselves in the foot by saying this is a terrible jumper. Well, we just had this situation with the Reform FC football shirt that Nigel Farage is flogging, and apparently they've all sold out of the 99 quid. So as soon as there's no such thing as bad publicity when it comes to a bad jumper. Anyway, well, there we go. Okay, finally, now I want to spin forwards to my next guest, because whether you're angry about a pink jumper or stubbed toe or something more serious, we have all had our moments of blind rage. And our next guest, who's coming on shortly, Sam Parker, has written a whole book about it, which is about reimagining anger. So Kenny, just before we go to him, let me ask you about anger, specifically male anger, from your perspective and your work with men. Are we too scared to be truly angry? Should we embrace it more?
I would say anger is a vital part of life. As long as I can hold my anger and my anger doesn't own me. Right. And as long as I don't suppress it and then go bang, or suppress it and then get depressed, or suppress it and then do the whole, I guess, to be frank, you could call it toxic femininity, which is passive aggressive, or play the mind games, or whatever it is. So it's good raw energy that needs to be harnessed and owned. And if I can't own it, then I'll get people around me who can help me own it, because I don't need to do this alone. Speak it out and don't let it get you down or harm other people. That is not an option. That's not man behavior. That's unruly, out of control boy behavior. Okay, well, that sounds very sensible. I'm going to cross-check that with Sam in just a moment. And of course, when you're listening, Kelly, if he says otherwise, you can go and kick a few bins outside, and you've now got license to do it. Well, look, thank you so much as ever for all that brilliant advice on the light and dark stories of the week. That, as ever, is our brilliant man whisperer, Kenny Mammarella-D'Cruz. Now, as I trailed, it's time to talk to our man of the week. And this week, that is senior editor at GQ magazine, Sam Parker, whose new book, Good Anger, questions whether we should stop thinking about anger as a bad emotion. Welcome to the show, Sam.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. Now, I've just been sort of leading up into this conversation by talking to Kenny, our regular sort of Man Friday correspondent. And I've got to ask you about this book and firstly, the genesis of it, because you wrote it after what you call the worst year of your life. So tell us about that and what you learned from it.
Yeah, I have to say, first of all, I think Kenny did a wonderful job there. I almost, there's no need to have me on. He kind of got it in one.
Okay.
But no, he explained it beautifully. The genesis of the book was that I had been reporting on the mental health revolution that's taken place in the last 5 years, 10 years or so, in the sort of public conversation, and the way that stigma had been taken away from, things like depression and anxiety. And reporting on that and thinking a very good development, and certainly an improvement on, what generations before us had. And yet in my private life, it was working on anger and getting more comfortable with anger that was making me feel a lot better. And so my problem was that I was a classic people pleaser, someone very conflict avoidant. Anger made me very uncomfortable, so I'd bottle it up sometimes for days. And it took me a long time to figure out that was actually sitting behind a lot of anxiety and unhappiness for me. And what I learned in writing the book is that this is actually really common, and Kenny sort of described it before. There are far more people in the world with the anger in issue than the anger out problem. And I think it's actually one of the great untold mental health stories of our times, really.
Well, that makes so much sense. I say that, I am a man, and I do always wonder about the correct way to address these moments. As you say, I think Kenny made some really, really good points. So in a nutshell, what we're dealing with here is that anger, rage, has a bad name, both in terms of the concept itself and how we've maybe been trained or taught or even just feel like we have to deal with it. Is that right?
Yeah, it's got a really bad reputation. And the where this problem begins is that we tend to conflate anger and aggression as though they're the same thing, and sometimes even anger and violence. If I was to say to you, I saw someone the other day and they were sad, you wouldn't assume that means they were curled up in a ball crying, right? But when I say to you, I saw someone that were angry, we often picture straight away that kind of red-faced man at traffic or whatever, someone who looks like he's about to give himself a heart attack. Anger is a healthy emotion that has a lot of useful information for us. It's there to protect us, Kenny mentioned energy. That's such an important word. It can be a source of, really useful energy. And aggression is a behavioral choice that we make that tends to make things worse for us, not better. And actually, the better way to think of it is that aggression is not the ultimate endpoint or the truest expression of anger. It's actually a rejection of anger, right? It's a sign that we can't tolerate the fears, the insecurities, the pain, the disrespect, whatever it is that anger is pointing us towards. We kind of shove that out of the way and become aggressive and get into conflict, or some people do. And so the reason it's got a bad rap is that we kind of think that they're the same thing when they're not. And I think separating the two things out is a really important first step to working on your own relationship with it.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, that idea, the separation of anger and aggression. So it's almost the emotion and then the sort of repercussions of it. So I assume your book deals with how else anger can be expressed, where else you can lead it to. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's most of the books that are about anger are aimed at people who, need to control their anger, their rage. They can't stop losing their temper. I really wanted to write a book for the people who have the anger in problem. I call it the other anger problem in the book, people who tend to suppress it and repress it and hold on to it. So it's more about how can you contact anger when it's an emotion that you're kind of very uncomfortable with in the first place. And, lots of us have this problem. A lot of women that I spoke to tend to cry when they get angry. And that's because the emotion that they learned was acceptable in its place was sadness. Funny enough, boys tend to do the opposite, right? So boys will show angry when really they're sad. So part of it is about how we're socialized. And there's a lot to unpick unpick there for us, personally. But yeah, it's kind of about how you can, first of all, use your body as a great way to get in touch with your anger, and then learn to report on it and kind of vocalize it. And then eventually it gets on to like how we can have constructive conversations that are honest in nature, but not confrontational and aggressive, and how that can actually make our life better, not worse.
Yeah, well, that all makes so much sense. And I'm interested in how things, I think people are starting to cotton onto it. So, for example, I've got a 4-year-old, and one of the books I read to him at night is called The Colour Monster. And anger is in there as a sort of red little monster. And it's interesting seeing how a young mind seems to understand that, maybe in a way that I, as an adult, sometimes struggle with. And so what you're saying rings really true. I have to ask, I don't want to be glib about this, but growing up, one of the things that I've had drummed into me is a great teacher who is from a long time ago, dare I say it, in a galaxy far, far away. His name's Yoda, I'm sure you're aware of him. And he said, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. And your book gives the lie to that completely. And so it's very refreshing hearing this. So I just wonder whether we've for so long felt that anger is always negative. And that's corrosive, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'd never want to go up against the wisdom of Yoda.
Well, he's old geez.
But, we talk about two things we say about anger, right? One is that we call it a negative emotion. Mm-hmm. And what that means in psychology is just that it isn't always pleasant to experience. It doesn't mean that it's bad for us per se, or that we should try and live without it, or that we'd be better off if it wasn't there. So that's one misconception. And I think, that's something that we need to change about the way we talk about emotions with children as well, because, things are different now. And I think we've kind of realized that validating our kids' big emotions is sort of an important and good thing to do. But for my generation and generations previous, the message was very, very different, right? And you would often be punished or rejected in some ways if you got angry. So the challenge for parents today, I think, and I've got a young daughter, is how do we let our kids hold those emotions and express them, socialize them to realize that aggression isn't the way to go with it, but also try and prevent them from, becoming ashamed of it and turning it inwards. It's very, very difficult stuff. Mm. And, we tend to think of anger as this almost sort of like old-fashioned emotion that was really only useful to us when, we lived in times of swords and chaos and fighting. That isn't true. It's actually a very sophisticated human emotion. It's very dependent on communication for its generation and for its resolution. Stand-up comedians make wonderful use of anger. Artists make great use of anger, musicians, painters. So there's far more depth to it as an emotion than we tend to think about. We paint it in very primary colors a lot of the time. And how we can stop, how we can prevent that from happening with kids, I think, is a really important question.
Well, I have to say, I just think this is a vital subject and a really timely book. So thank you so much for your insights and explanations of it. That is Sam Parker. He's the author of this, I think, a fantastic book, Good Anger, How Rethinking Rage Can Change Our Lives. And he's a senior editor at GQ magazine.